The vampire king drops to his knees before a human bookshop owner. His crimson eyes burn with centuries of gratitude as he whispers words no immortal has ever spoken to a mortal. She holds the fate of his only child in her hands, and she has no idea what she's about to become. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from and don't forget to click subscribe. The rain came down in sheets, turning the narrow alleyway behind Nora's bookshop into a river of dirty water and discarded trash. She was just closing up for the night, wrestling with the stubborn back door that always stuck in wet weather, when she heard it. The sound of running footsteps, light and desperate, splashing through puddles with the frantic rhythm of someone being chased. Nora had owned the forgotten page for 7 years now, ever since her grandmother had passed and left her the building along with its extensive collection of rare and esoteric books. It wasn't the most profitable business, a bookshop specializing in the obscure and the mystical, but it was hers, and she loved it with a fierce devotion that surprised even herself. The shop had become her sanctuary, her purpose, the one constant in a life that had otherwise been marked by loss and loneliness. She froze now, her keys halfway to the lock, every instinct telling her to get inside and mind her own business. This was the border district, the thin line between human territory and the supernatural zones that most sensible people avoided after dark. Strange things happened here. Dangerous things. She had learned early on to keep her head down, to pretend she didn't see the creatures that moved through the shadows, to act as if the impossible things that occurred on these streets were perfectly ordinary and none of her concern. And a woman alone had no business getting involved in whatever drama was unfolding in her alley. But then a small figure came hurtling around the corner, and all her sensible instincts flew right out the window. It was a boy, no more than 8 or 9 years old, with hair so pale it was almost white, and eyes that seemed to glow silver in the dim light of the street lamps. He was soaked to the bone, his expensive-looking clothes torn and muddy, his face streaked with tears and rain, and what might have been blood from a cut on his forehead. He looked terrified, the kind of bone-deep terror that came from running for your life. He saw Nora standing there with her keys in her hand, and for a split second their eyes met. She saw desperation in that silver gaze, and something else, something that looked like hope, flickering to life against all odds. "Please," he gasped, his voice barely audible over the pounding rain. "Please help me, they're coming. Please don't let them take me." Before Nora could respond, she heard more footsteps, heavier this time, accompanied by voices that carried the cold efficiency of professionals on a hunt. "He went this way. Check the alley. The master wants him alive. Don't damage him too badly. Little brat. When we catch him, I'm going to enjoy teaching him a lesson about running." Men in suits emerged from the shadows at the alley's entrance, 3 of them, their faces hard and their eyes scanning the darkness with predatory focus. They hadn't spotted Nora yet, hidden as she was in the shadowy alcove of her back door. They hadn't spotted the boy either, who had pressed himself against the wall, trying to make his small body even smaller. Nora had approximately 2 seconds to make a decision that would change her life forever. She didn't hesitate. Her hand shot out, grabbing the boy's wrist and yanking him through the door into the back room of her bookshop. She pulled the door closed behind them, wincing at the loud click of the lock engaging, and pressed her finger to her lips in the universal sign for silence. The boy nodded, his silver eyes wide, his small body trembling against hers as they stood in the darkness, listening to the men outside. "Check that door." Nora's heart stopped. She heard footsteps approaching, heard the rattle of the doorknob as someone tested it. The lock held, thank God, but she could hear the man on the other side considering his options. "It's locked. Old building. Probably been closed for hours. Break it down. And have human police crawling all over us? The master said to be discreet. We'll check the other end of the alley. The kid can't have gotten far." The footsteps retreated and Nora allowed herself to breathe again. But she didn't relax, didn't release her grip on the boy's wrist until the sounds had faded completely, and the alley had fallen silent except for the relentless drumming of the rain. "Are you okay?" she whispered, finally daring to speak. "Are you hurt?" The boy looked up at her with those impossible silver eyes, and Nora felt something shift in her chest, some protective instinct she hadn't known she possessed roaring to life. "You helped me," he said, wonder in his voice. "You didn't have to, but you helped me." "Of course I helped you. You're a child being chased by scary men in suits. What was I supposed to do? Hand you over to them?" "Most humans would have," the boy said quietly. "Most humans are afraid of getting involved in supernatural affairs." Nora's breath caught. Supernatural. She'd suspected, of course, the moment she'd seen those silver eyes, that unnatural paleness. But hearing it confirmed was something else entirely. "What are you?" she asked, then immediately shook her head. "No, that's not the right question. Who are you? And who are those men?" The boy was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that seemed far too old for his young features. "My name is Sebastian," he said finally, "and those men work for someone who wants to use me to hurt my father. They've been trying to kidnap me for months. Tonight they finally succeeded, but I escaped before they could take me to their master." "Your father? Who is your father?" Sebastian's jaw tightened. "If I tell you that, you'll be in even more danger than you already are. You've helped me enough. Just let me hide here until dawn and then I'll leave. I'll find another way to get home." "You're soaking wet, you're bleeding, and you're clearly exhausted," Nora said firmly. "I'm not letting you go anywhere in this condition. Come on, I have a first aid kit upstairs and some dry clothes that might fit you. We can figure out the rest once you're not in danger of catching pneumonia." She led him through the back room of the bookshop, past shelves stacked with boxes of new inventory and displays waiting to be assembled, up a narrow staircase that creaked beneath their feet. The stairs led to the small apartment where she lived above the store, her private sanctuary away from the world. It wasn't much. Just a bedroom barely large enough for her bed and dresser, a bathroom with ancient plumbing that groaned in protest whenever she ran the water, a tiny kitchen where she prepared simple meals, and a living room crammed with books that had overflowed from the shop below. Books everywhere, actually. Stacked on every available surface, tucked into corners, piled beside the couch, and under the coffee table. Romance novels mixed with academic texts, fantasy epics alongside histories of the supernatural world, cookbooks and poetry collections and leather-bound tomes in languages she couldn't even read. Her grandmother had been the same way, Nora remembered. Unable to pass a bookshop without buying something, unable to throw away a single volume no matter how damaged or outdated. But the apartment was warm and dry and safe, or at least as safe as anywhere could be with men in suits hunting through the night outside. It was home, the only real home Nora had ever known, and she would defend it and anyone inside it with everything she had. "Sit," she instructed, pointing to the worn couch while she gathered supplies from the bathroom cabinet. "I'm going to clean that cut on your forehead and then find you something dry to wear." Sebastian obeyed without protest, sinking into the cushions with the exhaustion that made him look even younger than his years. Up close, in the warm light of her apartment, Nora could see that he was beautiful in the way that supernatural creatures often were, all delicate features and impossibly perfect skin, like a porcelain doll brought to life. But there were shadows under his silver eyes, and a wariness in his posture that spoke of someone who had learned not to trust. "This might sting a little," Nora warned as she dabbed antiseptic on his forehead. The cut wasn't deep, thankfully, but head wounds always bled dramatically. "Can you tell me more about what happened? How did those men capture you in the first place?" Sebastian winced at the antiseptic but didn't cry out. I was at school. My father hired guards to protect me, but they were killed. The men took me to a warehouse on the edge of the city. They were going to transport me somewhere else, somewhere my father would never find me, but one of them made a mistake, left a door unlocked while they were arguing about something. I ran. How long ago was this? 3 days. 3 days. This child had been running for 3 days, alone in the city, hunted by men who wanted to use him as a weapon against his own father. The thought made Nora's blood boil with a fury she hadn't known she was capable of feeling. Your father must be frantic, she said softly. Is there a way to contact him? To let him know you're safe? I don't have a phone. They took everything when they captured me. Sebastian's voice cracked slightly, the first real sign of the emotional toll this ordeal had taken on him. I've been trying to make my way back to the palace, but it's on the other side of the city and the men keep finding me. I don't know how they keep tracking me. Every time I think I've lost them, they appear again. The palace? Nora's hands stilled on the bandage she was applying. Sebastian, who is your father? The boy met her eyes, and in that silver gaze she saw resignation mixed with something that might have been fear. Fear of her reaction, she realized. Fear that she would change her mind about helping him once she knew the truth. My father is Aldrich Nightshade, he said quietly, the Vampire King. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that Nora was only beginning to grasp. The Vampire King, the most powerful supernatural being in the entire territory, ruler of the vampire clans, a creature so ancient and terrible that even other supernatural beings spoke his name with respect and fear. And this small, frightened boy was his only child. Oh, Nora said faintly, that's quite a father. You can ask me to leave now if you want, Sebastian said, his voice carefully flat. I would understand. Getting involved with vampire royalty is dangerous. The men who are hunting me, they're working for someone who wants to overthrow my father. If they find out you helped me, they'll come for you too. Nora should have been terrified. She should have been calculating the fastest way to get this boy out of her apartment and her life before the consequences of her impulsive rescue came crashing down on her head. She was human, ordinary, powerless in a world where supernatural beings played games with stakes she couldn't even comprehend. But looking at Sebastian, at the way he braced himself for rejection as if it were inevitable, at the weariness in those silver eyes that no child should ever have to carry, Nora found that fear was the last thing she felt. I'm not asking you to leave, she said firmly. You're a child who needs help. I don't care if your father is the Vampire King or the man who delivers my mail. You're staying here until we can figure out how to get you home safely. Sebastian stared at her as if she'd grown a second head. You're serious? You really mean that? I really mean that. She finished applying the bandage and sat back on her heels. Now, let me find you some dry clothes, and then we're going to make a plan. Because I may be just a human bookshop owner, but I'm also incredibly stubborn and surprisingly resourceful. If there's a way to get you back to your father, we'll find it. For the first time since she'd met him, Sebastian smiled. It was a small thing, hesitant and uncertain, but it transformed his face from beautiful to absolutely radiant. Thank you, Nora, he said softly. I don't know why you're helping me, but thank you. You're welcome, Your Highness, she replied with a slight smile of her own. Now let's get you into some dry clothes before you catch your death. The dry clothes turned out to be an old t-shirt that hung to Sebastian's knees and a pair of sweatpants that had to be rolled up several times at the ankles. He looked ridiculous, swimming in fabric meant for an adult woman. But he also looked warmer and more comfortable than he had since Nora first saw him in that alley. She made him hot chocolate, the good kind with real cocoa and a splash of vanilla, and sat across from him at her tiny kitchen table while they tried to formulate a plan. The problem is communication, Nora said, tapping her fingers against her mug. If we could just contact your father, let him know where you are, he could send someone to get you. The palace has enchantments that block most forms of magical communication from the outside, Sebastian explained. It's a security measure, and the regular phone lines are monitored by my father's enemies. If we try to call, they'll trace it back to your location. What about going to the police? The human authorities, I mean. Sebastian shook his head. My father's enemies have people in the human government. We can't trust anyone. That's what makes this so difficult. The network working against my father is vast. They've been planning this for years. Nora frowned, thinking hard. What about the supernatural authorities? There must be some kind of law enforcement in your world. The Supernatural Council is supposed to be neutral, but several members are suspected of being involved in the conspiracy. My father has been investigating them for months, which is probably why they decided to act now. Sebastian's small hands wrapped around his mug of hot chocolate. They're trying to start a war, Nora. A war between the vampire clans and the other supernatural factions. If they can hold me hostage, force my father to make concessions, they can weaken his position enough to make their move. That's insane. Who would want to start a war? People who profit from chaos. People who think they can grab power in the confusion. People who hate my father for maintaining peace for the last 500 years. Sebastian's voice was bitter, far too cynical for someone his age. Politics in the supernatural world isn't so different from human politics. Just with more bloodshed. Nora sat back in her chair, her mind racing through possibilities and discarding them just as quickly. Every option seemed to lead to a dead end, every path blocked by the vast conspiracy Sebastian described. They were two people, one human woman and one vampire child, against an organization that had resources and reach beyond anything she could imagine. But there had to be something. Some weakness in the enemy's plans, some way to slip through the cracks. Tell me about the men who captured you, she said suddenly. Not their organization, but the men themselves. Were they vampires? Some of them. Some were other supernatural beings. A few were human. Sebastian's brow furrowed. Why? Because every organization has weak links. People who are in it for the money, or who were coerced into joining, or who might be convinced to look the other way for the right incentive. Nora leaned forward, her eyes brightening with the spark of an idea. You said they've been tracking you somehow, finding you no matter where you hide. Do you know how? Sebastian nodded slowly. I've been thinking about that. The only thing I can come up with is that they put some kind of tracking spell on me when I was captured. I felt something, when they first took me, a kind of burning sensation on my wrist. But when I looked, there was nothing there. Show me your wrist. Sebastian extended his arm and Nora examined his pale skin carefully. At first she saw nothing, just smooth, unmarked flesh. But when she tilted his wrist toward the light at a certain angle, she caught a glimpse of something, a faint shimmer that seemed to move just beneath the surface of his skin. There, she breathed. I can see it. It's like a mark that's not quite there. You can see it? Sebastian sounded surprised. Most humans can't perceive magical traces. I've always been a little sensitive to that kind of thing. My grandmother used to say I had a touch of the sight. Nora studied the shimmer more closely. It's a tracking spell, you said. Is there a way to remove it? Not without a skilled magic user. The spell is designed to be invisible and unbreakable by normal means. But not by abnormal means? Nora's mind was working furiously now, pieces of a plan beginning to fall into place. What if we didn't try to break it? What if we just made it useless? Sebastian tilted his head, curiosity replacing some of the weariness in his expression. What do you mean? I mean, a tracking spell tracks you, right? It tells them where you are. But what if you weren't anywhere? What if you were somewhere that the spell couldn't pinpoint? I don't understand. Nora stood up abruptly, crossing to a bookshelf crammed with volumes on every subject imaginable. She'd been a collector since childhood, drawn to knowledge of all kinds, but especially to the esoteric and the mystical. Most people thought her occult section was just a quirky hobby, an eccentric interest inherited from an eccentric grandmother. They had no idea how much genuine knowledge was hidden in those dusty pages, how many secrets her grandmother had uncovered during a lifetime of studying the supernatural world from the outside. Eleanor Chen had been a remarkable woman, a scholar and researcher who had dedicated her life to understanding the hidden world that existed alongside the human one. She had never possessed any magical abilities herself, had been as thoroughly human as anyone could be. But she had made it her mission to document and study the supernatural with the rigorous methods of academic inquiry. She had built relationships with beings who should have been her enemies, had earned respect in communities that typically viewed humans as nothing more than food or entertainment. And she had left all of her knowledge, all of her research, all of her carefully accumulated secrets to her only grandchild. "Here," Nora said, pulling out a worn leather book and flipping through its pages. The binding was cracked with age, the pages yellowed and fragile, but the handwriting inside was still crisp and clear, her grandmother's meticulous script recording observations and theories that had taken decades to develop. I remembered reading about this. Anchor points, places where the barrier between the human world and the supernatural realms is thin, where the normal rules of magic don't quite apply. Sebastian's eyes widened as he read over her shoulder. "You have books about supernatural magic? Human books?" "My grandmother left them to me. She was a scholar of sorts, studied the supernatural world from the outside. She could never practice magic herself, but she understood it better than most humans." Nora found the passage she was looking for and tapped the page triumphantly. "Here, anchor points create interference in magical workings. A tracking spell cast in one location would have difficulty functioning properly if the target passed through an anchor point. It would temporarily scramble the signal, make them think you're somewhere you're not." "But I'd have to know where an anchor point is," Sebastian said slowly. "And they're incredibly rare. Most humans don't even know they exist." "Lucky for you, I do." Nora grinned, a fierce expression that transformed her ordinary features into something almost striking. "There's one under my bookshop." Sebastian stared at her. "What? Why do you think I bought this place? I could have set up shop anywhere in the city, but I chose this building specifically because of what's underneath it. The anchor point is in the basement, in the original foundation stones. My grandmother discovered it decades ago, mapped its boundaries, documented its effects on magical phenomena. That's why those men couldn't track me to your door." Sebastian breathed, understanding dawning. "The moment I entered your building, I passed through the anchor point's field. The tracking spell lost my signal." "Exactly. And if we use that, if we can move through the anchor point at the right moment, we might be able to buy enough time to get you somewhere safe." Nora's mind was racing now, the plan crystallizing into something that might actually work. "We can't contact your father directly, but what if we didn't have to? What if we could find someone he trusts, someone outside the conspiracy, and get a message to them instead?" "There's a woman," Sebastian said slowly. "Lady Sophia. She's my godmother, one of my father's oldest allies. She lives in the neutral zone, in a fortified manor that even my father's enemies wouldn't dare attack openly. If we could reach her, she could get word to my father." "How far is her manor from here?" "On foot? Several hours, but the men will be watching the streets. They know I'm somewhere in this district now. They'll have patrols everywhere. We won't go on foot. We'll go through the anchor point." Nora pulled out another book, this one containing maps and diagrams that made Sebastian's eyes widen further. "Anchor points don't just scramble magic, They can also serve as pathways, shortcuts through the space between realms. If my grandmother's research is correct, the anchor point beneath this building connects to several others throughout the city. One of them should be close to the neutral zone. You're talking about dimensional travel. That's incredibly dangerous, especially for a human. I'm not planning to travel between dimensions. I'm just planning to use the anchor points as a very unusual subway system. Nora met Sebastian's worried gaze with determined confidence. Look, I'm not going to pretend this isn't risky. It absolutely is. But staying here isn't safe either. Those men know you're somewhere in this district. It's only a matter of time before they search every building, including mine. Our best chance is to move fast, use the advantage we have, and get you to Lady Sophia before they figure out where you've gone. Sebastian was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing the options. He was young, but he was also the son of the Vampire King, raised in a world of politics and danger. He understood risk, understood strategy, understood that sometimes the bold move was the only move. Okay, he said finally. When do we leave? Now, before the rain stops and they increase their patrols. Nora was already moving, gathering supplies she thought they might need. A flashlight, a first aid kit, some food and water, a jacket that might fit Sebastian if they encountered any cold spots. The anchor point is most active at night, when the barriers are naturally thinner. We'll have the best chance of using it successfully in the next few hours. They descended to the basement of the bookshop, passing through storage rooms filled with decades of accumulated inventory until they reached the oldest part of the building. Here, the walls were original stone, worn smooth by time, and the air had a strange quality that made Nora's ears pop slightly, like the pressure before a storm. I can feel it, Sebastian whispered, his silver eyes reflecting something Nora couldn't see. The anchor point. It's like a door that's always slightly open. According to my grandmother's notes, we need to focus on our destination while passing through. The anchor point responds to intention. If we both concentrate on Lady Sophia's manor, on getting there safely, the pathway should take us where we need to go. Should? My grandmother's research was theoretical. She never actually used the anchor points herself. Nora took Sebastian's hand in hers, felt his small fingers grip tight. But I trust her work. And right now, trust is all we have. They stepped forward together into the shimmer of air that marked the boundary of the anchor point, and the world fell away around them. It was like walking through water that wasn't wet, through darkness that wasn't quite dark. Nora felt Sebastian's hand in hers, the only solid thing in a universe that had suddenly become uncertain. Colors swirled around them, impossible colors that didn't have names, and sounds echoed from distances that couldn't exist. She felt stretched thin, as if her body was being pulled in directions she couldn't comprehend. But Sebastian's grip kept her anchored, kept her moving forward through the chaos. She focused on their destination, pictured a fortified manor in the neutral zone, imagined the safety waiting for them there. Lady Sophia, Sebastian had said, his godmother, someone his father trusted, someone who could help them. She held that image in her mind like a lifeline, refused to let the swirling unreality distract her from their goal. Time moved strangely in the between space. It might have been seconds that passed, or hours, or no time at all. Nora couldn't tell, couldn't measure the experience against anything she'd ever known. She simply walked, and hoped, and trusted that her grandmother's research would hold true. And then, between one breath and the next, they emerged. They were in a garden, immaculately maintained despite the late hour, with flowers that glowed softly in the darkness and pathways that seemed to shift when Nora wasn't looking directly at them. Roses in every color imaginable lined the walkways, their petals gleaming with an inner light that cast soft shadows on the perfectly trimmed grass. Fountains played music as water cascaded over crystal formations, and somewhere in the distance, Nora could hear the soft rustle of wind through leaves that seemed to whisper secrets to each other. The rain had stopped here, if it had ever been falling at all, and the air was warm and fragrant with the scent of jasmine and roses and something else, something magical that made Nora's skin tingle with awareness. This was a place of power, she realized. A sanctuary built and maintained by beings far older and more powerful than she could imagine. A manor house rose before them, elegant and imposing, its architecture a blend of classical beauty and impossible geometry. Windows blazed with light from dozens of rooms, each one glowing a slightly different color, as if the house itself was alive and breathing with energy. Towers reached toward the star-filled sky, and gargoyles perched on every corner, their stone eyes seeming to track Nora's movements with unsettling awareness. And standing on the front steps, as if she had been expecting them all along, was a woman with silver hair and ageless features and eyes that held centuries of wisdom and power. She was beautiful in the way that ancient things are beautiful, perfect and terrifying, and utterly beyond human comprehension. "Sebastian," the woman said, her voice carrying easily across the garden with the clarity of a bell. "My darling boy, we've been looking everywhere for you." Sebastian released Nora's hand and ran forward, throwing himself into the woman's arms with a sob of relief that broke Nora's heart. 3 days of running, of hiding, of being hunted like an animal, and finally he was somewhere safe, with someone who loved him. The tension drained from his small body as Lady Sophia held him close, murmuring words of comfort that Nora couldn't quite hear. "Lady Sophia," Sebastian managed through his tears, "I escaped. I ran for 3 days and Nora helped me. She saved me. She hid me from the men and used an anchor point to bring me here." Lady Sophia's silver eyes met Nora's over Sebastian's pale head, and Nora felt the weight of that ancient gaze like a physical thing. There was gratitude in those eyes, genuine and profound. But there was something else too, something calculating and curious. This was a being who had lived for centuries, who had played political games with stakes Nora couldn't imagine. She was taking Nora's measure, assessing her worth, deciding what role this unexpected human might play in the drama unfolding around them. "You are the human who sheltered my godson," she said. It wasn't a question. "You used an anchor point to bring him here, risking your own life in the process. You walked through the between space without any magical protection, without any training, guided by nothing but books and determination. That is either remarkably brave or remarkably foolish." "Probably both," Nora admitted, her voice steadier than she felt. "But it worked." "Indeed it did." Lady Sophia's lips curved into a slight smile. "And why did you do it? You are human. You have no stake in vampire politics, no reason to involve yourself in our conflicts. You could have turned Sebastian away, or worse, handed him over to his captors for whatever reward they might have offered. Why did you risk everything to help a stranger?" "Because he needed help," Nora said simply, "and I was in a position to give it. That's all that matters, isn't it? Someone needs help and you can provide it, so you do. Everything else is just details." Lady Sophia studied her for a long moment, then smiled more warmly. "Eleanor Chen's granddaughter. I should have known. She was exactly the same. Your grandmother. Stubborn, principled, utterly convinced that kindness was its own reward." Her eyes softened with old memories. "She was a remarkable woman. I see much of her in you." "You knew my grandmother?" Nora's voice cracked with surprise. "I knew her well. She was one of the few humans I have ever counted as a friend." Lady Sophia gently released Sebastian and descended the steps, crossing the garden to stand before Nora. Up close, she was even more beautiful and more terrifying, power radiating from her like heat from a flame. Come inside, both of you. There is much to discuss, and I imagine you are exhausted from your journey." She paused, her silver eyes meeting Nora's with an intensity that made the human woman's breath catch. "The Vampire King will want to know that his son is safe, and I suspect he will want to meet the remarkable human who saved him. Your life is about to change, Nora Chen. I hope you're ready for what comes next." Nora wasn't sure she was ready. Wasn't sure anyone could be ready for involvement with vampire royalty, with ancient conspiracies, with a world so far beyond her ordinary human existence. But as she followed Lady Sophia into the manor, Sebastian's small hand finding hers again as if it belonged there, she found that she didn't regret her choices. Not the choice to help a frightened boy in an alley, not the choice to believe in her grandmother's research, not the choice to walk through impossible spaces to bring a child to safety. Whatever came next, she would face it. Because that's what you did when someone needed help, and you were in a position to give it. You helped, and you dealt with the consequences later. The interior of Lady Sophia's manor was even more impressive than the exterior had suggested. Nora found herself walking through halls lined with paintings that seemed to move when she wasn't looking directly at them, past sculptures that breathed and blinked, under chandeliers that floated unsupported in the air. It was a palace of wonders, every surface covered with evidence of wealth and power accumulated over centuries of existence. Sebastian clung to her hand throughout the tour, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. Nora understood the feeling. After everything he'd been through, the thought of losing his one human ally must be terrifying. She squeezed his fingers reassuringly and kept walking, following Lady Sophia deeper into the heart of the manor. They ended up in a sitting room that managed to be both impossibly elegant and surprisingly comfortable. Fires crackled in twin fireplaces at either end of the room, and the furniture, while clearly antique and priceless, looked soft and welcoming. Lady Sophia gestured for them to sit, then took a chair opposite them and studied Nora with those ageless silver eyes. "I've sent word to Aldrich," she said. "He will be here within the hour. In the meantime, perhaps you would like to tell me exactly how my godson came to be in your care." Nora recounted the events of the evening, from the moment she'd heard footsteps in the alley to their journey through the anchor point. Lady Sophia listened without interruption, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. When Nora finished, the ancient vampire was silent for a long moment. "You used Eleanor's research on the anchor points," she said finally. "That knowledge was supposed to die with her. It's far too dangerous to be in human hands." "She left it to me," Nora replied, a note of defensiveness creeping into her voice. "Everything she knew, everything she'd discovered. She trusted me with it. She trusted you because you're her blood, and because she saw something in you that she believed was worth cultivating." Lady Sophia's eyes narrowed slightly. "Tell me, Nora, did your grandmother ever explain to you why she studied the supernatural world so obsessively? Why she devoted her entire life to understanding beings who could have killed her without a second thought? She said it was curiosity, a scholar's drive to understand the unknown. That was part of it, but not all." Lady Sophia rose from her chair and crossed to one of the fireplaces, staring into the flames as if seeing something far away. "Your grandmother had a gift, Nora, a rare sensitivity to magical phenomena that allowed her to perceive things most humans couldn't. It's why she could document the anchor points, why she could map the supernatural world with such accuracy. She wasn't just a scholar, she was a bridge between worlds." Nora felt a chill run down her spine. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that gift is hereditary. I'm saying I see the same sensitivity in you that I saw in Eleanor. You shouldn't have been able to navigate the anchor point without training, but you did. You shouldn't have been able to see the tracking spell on Sebastian's wrist, but you did." Lady Sophia turned to face her, and her expression was deadly serious. You have potential, Nora Chen. Potential that certain parties would love to exploit. Before Nora could respond, the doors to the sitting room burst open, and a man strode in who could only be the Vampire King. He was magnificent, terrifying, overwhelming in a way that made Nora's human brain struggle to process what she was seeing. Tall and powerfully built, with features that were almost painfully beautiful, he radiated authority and ancient power with every step. His hair was black as midnight, falling past his shoulders in waves that seemed to absorb the light around them. His eyes were the deep crimson of fresh blood, ancient and knowing, containing depths that spoke of centuries of existence and experiences beyond human comprehension. His presence seemed to fill the entire room, pushing against Nora's consciousness like a physical weight. She felt her knees want to buckle, felt the instinctive human urge to flee from a predator so far beyond her ability to comprehend. This was a being who had walked the earth when her distant ancestors were still huddling in caves. This was a creature who had watched civilizations rise and fall, who had shaped the course of supernatural history with his decisions and his power. But all that fearsome majesty melted away the instant his eyes landed on Sebastian. The transformation was remarkable, instant, complete. The terrifying Vampire King became simply a father, desperate and relieved, and overwhelmed with emotion at the sight of his child safe and whole. His crimson eyes softened, his rigid posture relaxed, and something that looked like tears glistened at the corners of those ancient, terrible eyes. "Father." Sebastian released Nora's hand and flew across the room, throwing himself into his father's arms with a cry of pure joy. The Vampire King caught him easily, lifting him off the ground and holding him so tight it looked almost painful, burying his face in his son's pale hair and breathing deep as if memorizing his scent. "My son." Aldrich's voice cracked with emotion, all pretense of royal composure abandoned. "My boy. When I learned what had happened, when we couldn't find you, I thought I had lost you forever. I'm okay, Father. I escaped. Nora helped me. She saved my life." The Vampire King looked up, his crimson eyes finding Nora across the room. For a long moment they simply stared at each other. The ancient immortal and the ordinary human woman, taking each other's measure. Then Aldrich set Sebastian down gently, crossed the room in 3 swift strides, and dropped to one knee before Nora. She stared at him, utterly stunned. The Vampire King, the most powerful supernatural being in the territory, was kneeling before her like a supplicant before a queen. "I owe you a debt I can never repay," Aldrich said, his voice low and intense. "You saved my son. You risked your life for a child you had never met, with nothing to gain and everything to lose. There are no words sufficient to express my gratitude." "Please get up," Nora managed, her voice coming out as barely more than a whisper. "This isn't necessary. I just did what anyone would do." "No." Aldrich rose to his feet, but his eyes never left hers. "What you did was extraordinary. What you did was heroic. Most humans would have turned away. Most vampires would have turned away. You stood between my son and danger, and you found a way to bring him to safety when all seemed lost." He reached out and took her hand in his touch cool but surprisingly gentle. "Ask me for anything, Nora Chen. Anything in my power to give is yours." "I don't want anything," Nora said, uncomfortable with the intensity of his gratitude. "I just wanted to help Sebastian. That's all." Aldrich studied her face, searching for something she couldn't identify. Whatever he found seemed to satisfy him, because he nodded slowly and released her hand. "Then at least accept my hospitality for the evening. It's late, and traveling through anchor points is exhausting, even for those with training. You'll stay here tonight, rest, and tomorrow we can discuss how best to ensure your safety." "My safety?" The people who took Sebastian know that someone helped him escape. They'll be looking for you, trying to identify who you are and eliminate you before you can cause them any more trouble. Aldrich's expression darkened. You saved my son, Nora. I will not allow you to be harmed because of it. Nora wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she could take care of herself, but exhaustion was crashing over her now that the adrenaline was fading. The journey through the anchor point had taken more out of her than she'd realized, and her body was demanding rest with increasing urgency. Okay, she said finally, I'll stay tonight, but tomorrow, I need to get back to my shop. I have a business to run. Aldrich's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. We'll discuss it tomorrow. The guest room they gave her was larger than her entire apartment, with a bed that could have slept 6 people comfortably, and a bathroom equipped with every luxury imaginable. Nora collapsed onto the mattress without even changing out of her clothes, asleep almost before her head hit the pillow. She dreamed of silver eyes and anchor points, of gardens that glowed in the darkness and kings who knelt before ordinary women. And running through all of it, like a golden thread through a tapestry, was the feeling of Sebastian's small hand in hers, the trust of a child who had chosen her as his protector. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through curtains that she was certain had been closed when she fell asleep, and the smell of coffee and fresh bread was drifting from somewhere nearby. She found a tray on the bedside table, laden with breakfast foods, and a note in elegant handwriting. Sebastian would like to see you when you're ready. He's in the library. Take your time. Nora ate quickly, washed her face, and attempted to make her hair presentable, then followed a servant's directions to the Manor's library. The room was massive, 3 stories of books reaching toward a ceiling painted with scenes from what looked like supernatural history. And there, curled up in a window seat with a book in his lap, was Sebastian. His face lit up when he saw her. Nora, you're awake. I was worried you would sleep all day. How long was I out? Nora asked, settling into a chair across from him. Almost 12 hours. Lady Sophia said anchor point travel is hard on humans. Sebastian set his book aside and leaned forward eagerly. Father wants to talk to you. He's in his study, but he said not to rush. He said you should eat and rest and come when you're ready. What does he want to talk about? I don't know exactly, but I think he wants to offer you a job. Nora blinked. A job? I told him about your grandmother's research, about the anchor point under your bookshop, about how you knew all that stuff about magic and supernatural creatures. Sebastian's silver eyes were bright with excitement. He was really interested. He said someone with your knowledge and your abilities could be very valuable. Sebastian, I'm just a bookshop owner. I don't have any abilities. Lady Sophia says you do. She says you have the same gift your grandmother had, the sensitivity to magical phenomena. She says it's rare and valuable, and that with training, you could do amazing things. Sebastian grabbed her hand, his grip eager. Say you'll at least talk to my father, please. I don't want you to go back to your old life and never see me again. The plea in his voice was impossible to resist. I'll talk to him, Nora promised, but I'm not making any decisions until I know what he's actually proposing. The Vampire King's study was exactly what Nora would have expected. Dark wood paneling, walls lined with books that looked older than civilization, a massive desk that probably weighed more than her car. Aldrich sat behind it, looking every inch the ruler of a supernatural empire, but he rose when she entered and gestured to a comfortable chair across from his desk. Thank you for coming, he said, as if she'd had any real choice. I hope you're feeling better after your rest. Much better, thank you. Nora sat carefully, trying not to feel intimidated by the weight of centuries staring at her from across the desk. Sebastian said you wanted to talk to me about something. I do. Aldrich steepled his fingers, studying her with those unnerving crimson eyes. I've been investigating the conspiracy that attempted to kidnap my son. It's larger than I initially believed, with tentacles reaching into every level of supernatural society. Defeating it will require resources I don't currently possess, including information about parts of the supernatural world that have traditionally been closed to vampire influence. And you think I can help with that? I think your grandmother spent 60 years building relationships with beings who would never speak to a vampire. I think she documented aspects of the supernatural world that have never been recorded anywhere else. And I think you inherited not just her knowledge, but her gift for seeing what others cannot. Aldrich leaned forward slightly. I want to offer you a position in my household, Nora, as an advisor, a researcher, a bridge between my world and the hidden corners that even we cannot reach. I have a bookshop, Nora said automatically, which you can continue to run if you wish. I would simply ask for your assistance when matters arise that require your particular expertise. Aldrich's expression softened almost imperceptibly. And there is another consideration. Sebastian has become quite attached to you. He speaks of little else since arriving here. Having you in our household, even in a professional capacity, would make him very happy. Nora thought about her life before last night. The quiet routine of the bookshop, the solitary evenings in her apartment, the careful distance she maintained from everyone around her. It had been safe, that life, predictable, empty. And then she thought about Sebastian's smile, about the wonder in his eyes when she'd agreed to help him, about the feeling of his small hand in hers as they walked through impossible spaces together. I have conditions, she heard herself say. Aldrich's eyebrow rose. Name them. My shop remains mine. I continue to run it as I see fit. And I want full access to my grandmother's research, all of it, including whatever Lady Sophia might have that came from her. Done. I want to be able to say no. If you ask me to do something I'm not comfortable with, I can refuse without consequences. Within reason. But yes, I will respect your boundaries. And I want Sebastian to be able to visit me. At the shop, in the human world. I want him to have a life beyond palace walls and supernatural politics. Aldrich was quiet for a long moment, something shifting in his ancient eyes. You care for my son, he said finally. Already, after knowing him for only a day, you care for him. He's easy to care for. He's brave and kind, and he deserves to be happy. Nora met the vampire king's gaze directly. I know I'm just a human, Your Majesty. I know I don't have power or position or any of the things that matter in your world. But Sebastian chose to trust me, and I won't betray that trust. Not for anything. Aldrich was silent for so long that Nora began to worry she'd gone too far, demanded too much from a being who could end her life with a thought. But when he finally spoke, his voice was soft with something that sounded almost like wonder. You remind me of someone, he said. Someone I loved very much, a long time ago. She had the same fire in her eyes, the same fierce protectiveness, the same absolute conviction in her own principles. He smiled, and for a moment, he looked almost human. Sebastian's mother was like that. I think she would have liked you. Sebastian's mother? She died when he was born, a complication of carrying a half-vampire child. Old grief flickered across Aldrich's features before being carefully suppressed. I have raised him alone ever since, trying to be both father and mother, often failing at both. He needs more than I can give him. He needs someone who sees him as a child first and a prince second. That's what I see, Nora said quietly. That's all I've ever seen. I know. Aldrich rose from his chair and extended his hand. Your conditions are accepted, Nora Chen. Welcome to the House of Nightshade. The months that followed were a whirlwind of change and discovery. Nora divided her time between her bookshop and the palace, learning to navigate a world she had only ever studied from the outside. The transition wasn't easy, requiring her to master new protocols in politics, to learn the intricate dance of supernatural society, to find her place in a hierarchy that had existed for millennia before her birth. She pored through her grandmother's research with new eyes, finding layers of meaning she had never noticed before. Her grandmother had been meticulous, documenting not just facts but contexts, not just observations but interpretations. With Lady Sophia's guidance, Nora began to understand the full scope of what Eleanor Chen had accomplished, the bridges she had built, the secrets she had uncovered, the knowledge she had preserved for future generations. She trained with Lady Sophia to develop her sensitivity to magical phenomena, discovering abilities she had never known she possessed. It turned out her grandmother had been right about the gift running in their blood. Nora could perceive magical traces that were invisible to most beings, could sense the presence of supernatural creatures before they revealed themselves, could feel the pulse of anchor points and power lines that crisscrossed the world like an invisible web. The training was grueling, pushing her to the limits of her physical and mental endurance, but Nora threw herself into it with determination. If she was going to be part of this world, she was going to be useful. If she was going to protect Sebastian and help Aldrich defeat his enemies, she needed to develop every advantage she could. And she spent countless hours with Sebastian, watching him bloom under her attention like a flower finally given proper sunlight. He visited her shop on weekends, curling up in the reading nook with hot chocolate while she worked the counter. She attended his lessons at the palace, encouraging him when he struggled and celebrating when he succeeded. They became family, not by blood, but by choice, bound together by a connection that had been forged in a rainy alley and strengthened with every passing day. The conspiracy that had tried to kidnap Sebastian was slowly dismantled, thanks in part to Nora's unique contributions. Her grandmother's research revealed hidden alliances and ancient secrets that helped Aldrich identify the traitors in his midst. Her sensitivity allowed her to detect magical threats that even vampire senses couldn't perceive. She became valuable, not despite her humanity, but because of it, a bridge between worlds that had never had a bridge before. And somewhere along the way, something else began to grow. Something unexpected and perhaps impossible, something that neither Nora nor Aldrich had anticipated. It started with conversations that stretched late into the night, discussions of politics and history, and the nature of existence that left Nora's mind buzzing with new ideas. It continued with glances that lingered a little too long, with touches that seemed to happen more and more frequently, with a growing awareness of each other that couldn't be explained by professional respect alone. It was Sebastian who noticed first, of course. Children always noticed these things before adults were ready to admit them. "You love my father," he said one afternoon, matter of fact and utterly certain. "And he loves you. Why don't you just tell each other?" Nora choked on her tea. "Sebastian, we're not. It's complicated. That's what father says too, but I don't see what's complicated about it." Sebastian tilted his head, his silver eyes far too knowing for his age. "You make each other happy. Isn't that what matters? Your father is the vampire king. I'm a human bookshop owner. It's not exactly a traditional match. So, nothing about our family is traditional." Sebastian grinned, a mischievous expression that made him look exactly like the child he was supposed to be. "Just tell him, Nora. I promise it will work out." It took her another month to work up the courage, but finally, on a quiet evening in the palace library, Nora found herself alone with Aldrich and decided that Sebastian was right. Whatever came of it, she needed to be honest about what she felt. "I have something to tell you," she said, her heart pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Something personal." Aldrich set aside the document he'd been reading, his full attention focusing on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I'm listening." "I love you," Nora said, the words tumbling out before she could lose her nerve. I know it's ridiculous. I know I'm human, and you're ancient and powerful, and there are 1,000 reasons why this is a terrible idea. But I love you, Aldrich. I've been falling for you for months, and I can't pretend anymore. The silence that followed was the longest of Nora's life. She watched emotions flicker across Aldrich's face, too fast for her human eyes to track, and braced herself for rejection, for gentle dismissal, for the end of everything she'd built here. Instead, Aldrich crossed the room in a blur of supernatural speed and kissed her. It was gentle, almost hesitant, as if he was afraid she might break. His lips were cool against hers, but the emotion behind the kiss burned with centuries of passion and loneliness, finally finding their answer. When he pulled back, his crimson eyes were soft in a way she had never seen before. I have loved you since the night you walked through an anchor point with nothing but books and determination to guide you, he said quietly. I have loved you since you looked me in the eye and demanded conditions before agreeing to work for me. I have loved you since the first time I saw you make my son laugh. Really laugh. In a way he hadn't since his mother died. He cupped her face in his cool hands. I was afraid to tell you. Afraid that the weight of what I am would crush what we could have. But if you're willing to try, Nora Chen, then so am I. I'm willing, she whispered. I'm terrified, but I'm willing. Their courtship was unlike anything Nora could have imagined. Aldrich showed her wonders beyond human comprehension, took her to places that existed only in legend, shared with her secrets that no human had ever known. He took her to the crystal caves beneath the mountains, where formations of pure magic grew like frozen waterfalls of light. He showed her the library of shadows, where books wrote themselves, and knowledge was stored in forms beyond human language. He introduced her to beings from legend, to creatures she had only ever read about, to a world so vast and strange and beautiful that she sometimes felt she would never stop discovering new wonders. And in return, she gave him something equally precious: normality. Quiet evenings in her bookshop, curled up on opposite ends of the couch with books in their laps. Walks through human parks where no one knew he was a king, where they could simply be two people enjoying each other's company. The simple joy of being loved for himself. Not his power or his position, not what he could provide or protect. Just for who he was when all the titles and responsibilities were stripped away. They learned each other slowly, carefully, building trust through shared experiences and honest conversations. Aldrich told her about his long existence, about the loves he had lost and the mistakes he had made, about the weight of ruling for centuries and the loneliness that came with it. Nora told him about her childhood, about losing her parents, about the grandmother who had raised her, and the legacy she had left behind. They discovered they complemented each other in unexpected ways. His ancient wisdom balanced her fresh perspective. Her human intuition provided insights his vampire logic sometimes missed. Her warmth softened his centuries of emotional armor, and his strength provided stability when her doubts threatened to overwhelm her. They married under a blood moon, the rarest and most auspicious time for supernatural unions, with Sebastian standing proudly at Aldrich's side and Lady Sophia officiating the ancient ceremony. The wedding was held in the palace's grand ballroom, transformed for the occasion into a wonderland of floating candles and magical flowers and decorations that seemed to have been spun from pure starlight. Nora wore a gown of deepest midnight blue, the traditional color for vampire queens, adorned with silver embroidery that depicted the story of their meeting in intricate detail. Aldrich wore black, as befitting a king, but his eyes held a warmth that made him look almost human as he watched his bride walk toward him. The ceremony itself blended human and vampire traditions, a symbol of the union they represented. Vows were spoken in both the ancient vampire tongue and modern English, Rings were exchanged along with the traditional vampire binding of blood, and when they kissed to seal their union, the assembled guests erupted in applause that shook the crystal chandeliers. It was the first marriage between a vampire king and a human in recorded history, and it sent shockwaves through supernatural society that were felt for decades. Some celebrated it as a new era of cooperation between humans and supernaturals. Others condemned it as an abomination, a betrayal of vampire tradition and purity. But Nora and Aldrich didn't care about politics or precedent. They cared only about each other, and about the son they now shared, and about the family they had built from an unlikely beginning. Nora chose to remain human for the first few years, wanting to be certain of her decision before taking a step that couldn't be undone. She watched Aldrich and Sebastian carefully, observed the reality of vampire existence with clear eyes, made sure she understood exactly what she would be choosing before she chose it. But eventually, when she was ready, when she was certain, Aldrich turned her. The transformation was painful, as all such transformations were, the death and rebirth that marked the end of one existence and the beginning of another. But Aldrich held her through every moment just as she had held Sebastian's hand through the anchor point, and when she woke to eternity, his face was the first thing she saw. "Welcome to forever, my love," he whispered, and she knew she had made the right choice. 100 years later, Nora stood in the moonlight garden of the palace, watching Sebastian, now grown, dance with his own mate at his wedding celebration. The little boy she had found in that rainy alley had become a man, a prince beloved by his people, a leader who combined his father's strength with his mother's compassion. He had grown tall and handsome, his silver eyes now carrying the wisdom of experience, as well as the kindness that had always been his nature. His bride was a vampire princess from a distant territory, a match that cemented alliances and strengthened bonds between kingdoms. But Nora could see that it was more than politics that had brought them together. The way Sebastian looked at his bride, the tenderness in his touch, the joy in his smile, all of it spoke of genuine love, the kind of love that Nora and Aldrich had found against all odds. The garden was full of guests, supernatural beings from across the territories who had come to witness the marriage of the crown prince. Vampires and werewolves and fae and beings Nora couldn't even identify mingled beneath the stars, united for one night in celebration of a love that bridged any divide. Aldrich came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist in an embrace that still made her heart flutter after all these years. A century of marriage, and she still felt the same thrill when he touched her, the same warmth when he looked at her with those ancient crimson eyes. "Happy?" he asked, the same question he'd asked her every night since their wedding. "Completely," she replied, leaning back into his solid presence. "I still can't believe sometimes that this is my life, that all of this came from one decision to help a scared kid hide from men in suits." "One decision changed everything," Aldrich agreed, his voice soft against her hair. "One moment of kindness set in motion events that altered the course of supernatural history. You saved my son. You healed my heart. You brought peace to a world that had known only conflict for centuries. I just did what anyone would do." "No," Aldrich said firmly, "you did what you would do. What your grandmother raised you to do. What most people are too afraid or too selfish to consider." He turned her in his arms so they were facing each other, his hands cupping her face with infinite tenderness. "You are extraordinary, Nora Nightshade. You have always been extraordinary. I thank whatever powers exist that you were in that alley on that rainy night, that your heart was big enough to shelter a stranger, that your courage was strong enough to defy an empire. Is that what the historians will say? The historians will say that a human woman of extraordinary courage saved the life of a vampire prince and won the heart of a vampire king." Aldrich pressed a kiss to her forehead. They will say that her compassion and wisdom helped bring about an era of unprecedented peace between humans and supernaturals. They will say that she proved love could bridge any divide, overcome any obstacle, transform any darkness into light. That's a lot to live up to. You've already lived up to it and more. He smiled, and even after a century, that smile still made her breath catch. I love you, Nora. I have loved you since the moment I saw my son's face light up when he spoke of you. I will love you for all the centuries to come. I love you too, she whispered, forever. They watched their son spin his bride across the dance floor, watched the guests mingle and laugh and celebrate. This family, this life, this eternity of love and purpose and meaning, all of it had grown from a single seed planted on a rainy night in an alley behind a bookshop. She had helped a runaway boy hide from men in suits. She hadn't known he was the Vampire King's only child. She hadn't known that saving him would lead to all of this, to love and power and a place in a world she had only ever watched from the outside. But she had helped him anyway, because that's what you did when someone needed help and you were in a position to give it. You helped. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, helping changed everything. Forever.